Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Panchabhi Brahma Chaturbhi Dashabhi Satha Etat Chaturvimshatikam Ganam Pradhanikam Vidhu Mahabhutani Panchaiva Bhurapognirmarunnabha तन्मात्राणि च तवन्ति गन्धादीनि मठानि मे इन्द्रियाणि दशस्रोत्रं त्वग्रग्रश्ननाशिकः वाक्करौ चारणौ मेध्यं पायुर्दशन उच्यते मनोबुद्धिरहङ्कारश्चित्तमिति अन्तरात्मकम् चतुर्धा लक्ष्यते भेदो वित्तलक्षणरूपाय रूपया एतवानेव सङ्ख्यातो ब्रह्मणा सगुणस्य सन्निवेशो मया प्रोक्तो यः काला पञ्चविंशकः. So I'm reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26. Today we will be covering verses 11 through 15. So that's what I just read. Let me read it again. Panchabhi Brahma Chaturbhi Dashabhisthatha Etacchatur Vimshatikam Ganam Pradhanikam Vidhu. The aggregate elements, namely the five gross elements, the five subtle elements, the four internal senses, the five senses for gathering knowledge, and the five outward organs of action are known as pradhana. That's the translation by Srila Prabhupada, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. And the next text, text number 12, Mahabhutani Panchaiva Bhurapo Nirmarun Nabha Tanmatrani Chatavanti Gandhadini Matani Me. The translation, there are five gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also five subtle elements: smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. Text number 13. Indriyani dashastrotram tvagdragarashana nasikaha vakarau charanau medham payurdashama uchyate. The translation. The senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action, number 10, namely the auditory sense, the sense of taste, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, and the active organs for speaking, working, traveling, generating, and evacuating. Text number 14. Manobuddhir ahankaras chittam iti antaratmakam Chaturdha lakshate bhedo Vitya lakshana rupaya. Translation. The internal subtle senses are experienced as having four aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions since they represent different characteristics. And text 15. Etavaneva sankhyato brahmana sagunasyaha Sanivesho Matya Prokto Ya Kala Panchavimshakaha. Translation. All these are considered the qualified Brahman. The mixing element, which is known as time, is counted as the 25th element. So I'm going to go back and read the pulpit. starting with text 11, purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. According to the Bhagavad Gita, the sum of the 24 elements described herein is called the Yonir Mahat Brahma. Yonir Mahat Brahma. The sum total of the living entities is impregnated into this Yonir Mahat Brahma, and they are born in different forms, beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant. In the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures, the sum total of the 24 elements, pradhana, is also described as Yonir Mahad Brahma. It is the source of the birth and subsistence of all living entities. Text 12 has no purport, but we'll cover that again. There are 5 gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also 5 subtle elements: smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. Text 13, again, no purport. The translation is the senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action number 10, namely the auditory sense, the sense of taste, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, and the active organs for speaking, working, traveling, generating, and evacuating. Text 14, purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The 4 internal senses or subtle senses described herein are defined by different characteristics. When pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination, and when identification with the body becomes prominent, one is said to be situated under false ego. Consciousness is the function of the soul, and therefore, behind consciousness, there is soul. Consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankara. Let me read the last 2 lines again. That's the crux of this whole uh, set of verses for today. Consciousness is the function of the soul, and therefore, behind consciousness, there is soul. Consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankara. And text 15, purport. According to the Vedic version, there is no existence beyond Brahman. Sarvam Khalvaidam Brahma, Chandogya Upanishad 3:14:1. It is stated also in the Vishnu Purana that whatever we see is Parasya Brahmana Shakti. Everything is an expansion of the energy of the supreme absolute truth, Brahman. When Brahman is mixed with the 3 qualities of goodness, passion, and ignorance, there results the material expansion, which is sometimes called Sadguna Brahman, and which consists of these 25 elements. In the Nirguna Brahman, where there is no material contamination, or in the spiritual world, the 3 modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are not present. Let me read it again. In the Nirguna Brahman, where there is no material contamination, or in the spiritual world, the 3 modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are not present. Where Nirguna Brahman is found, simple, unalloyed goodness prevails. Saguna Brahman is described by the Sankhya system of philosophy as consisting of 25 elements, including the time factor, past, present, and future. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Gnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Um, the weather seems to be getting better now, and hopefully it stays that way. But this is Chicago, and Chicago weather can be very unpredictable, as we all know. So we're welcoming the spring, and we're getting into the summer here shortly. And today is also a very auspicious day for people around the world. It happens to be Easter Sunday. And so thank you again for joining us. And let's see if we can have some discussion as we get through this. So today we're reading from Canto 3, the 26th chapter, text 11 through 15 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, called The Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. And here Lord Kapila is continuing to speak to his mother, Mother Devahuti, who seems to be very troubled at this point. And she has some genuine issues and genuine questions in terms of what is the purpose in life? How do we get out of these miseries? And Lord Kapila Dev, being the incarnation of the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Personality, is instructing his mother. I mean, this is not the usual situation where, the child is trying to instruct the mother or the parent. But in this case, the parent is the child, and the child is the Supreme Lord of all creation. So that's the specialty, as we and the of the loving exchange that we're seeing here, as described so beautifully in this entire canto and in this chapter specifically, where Lord Kapiladev is getting more and more into the details of the Sankhya philosophy. So I know there is some confusion among people in the general population. I say, oh, Sankhya philosophy, Lord Kapila sounds very familiar. Oh, we've heard that, Sankhya philosophy by Kapila Dev. So even the Bhagavatam, even Prabhupada says, and the Bhagavatam it is said that the Sankhya philosophy was propounded by Kapila Dev, as in Lord Kapila Dev, the incarnation, as Lord Kapila Dev as the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and also as Kapila, who was also a philosopher who propounded the Sankhya philosophy. Both the Sankhya philosophies do speak about the material elements, but there is a difference between the two. And I was listening to Srila Prabhupada's lecture the other day, and in that, Srila Prabhupada very clearly made the distinction, saying that, the difference being that while, the Kapila, who propounded the 24 material elements, stopped with those 24 material elements, which we will be covering as well in today's discussion. But in addition to that, Lord Kapila Dev, the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he not only discussed the 24 elements, but he discussed the 25th element and beyond the 25th element. What is actually driving all of these 25 elements put together? That essentially is the difference between the Sankhya philosophies, between Lord Kapila Dev and Kapila. So let's start with the word pradhana. Pradhana is something that we've been discussing. In fact, on the previous verse, the previous text in yesterday's lecture by Akhananam was about the pradhana. So today we will continue from where he left off. Excuse me. And pradhana, as it is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam and also in the purports as put together by Srila Prabhupada. Pradhana is basically and essentially the unmanifested state of material nature. Okay, so it is only when it's an unmanifested state. In other words, it is in a neutral state. Nothing is happening there. It is only when the glance of the Supreme Lord in the form of Mahavishnu agitates the Pradhana, which is up until then in an unmanifested form, that is when, through the influence of time, creation is set in motion. So it is important to understand that Pradhana up until then is the unmanifested state. It is only through the influence of time, which is coming from the Supreme Personality, who is the source, is when the entire manifestation, the creation in the material realm happens. So, time, in other words, is the representation of the Supreme Lord. And that is also stated in the verses that we are covering today, where Krishna says that time is the 25th. In this case, Kapila Dev is saying that time is the 25th element. So there are the 24 elements, and then there is the 25th element, which is time. So we're all science students in some form or the other. We're all inquisitive in terms of, why are we here? What is this planet all about? How is this Earth holding this special position in our solar system? What is the solar system, and how does it relate to, this universe of, in the Milky Way and beyond the Milky Way, the galaxies into the universe, and how many more universes there are? And we know only so much, and we're finding out more and more that there is very little and little that we know about the entire, not only our solar system, but of our galaxies, and not only of our galaxy, but also of our universe. What to speak of the millions and trillions of universes that exist outside of our material universe. And they're all only in the material universe. What to speak of the spiritual universes, where the Bhagavatam very clearly says that we're only, roughly one third to one fourth of the entire creation. So the spiritual world is way bigger. It is three times bigger than our entire universe of universes, not just our universe, but our entire universe of universes. So it's mind-boggling to even try and fathom, what it's like. But coming back to our universe, coming back to our finite, little, tiny, insignificant universe, which is also so huge. And to us, it's like infinitely huge. Scientists have been battling with this whole, relentlessly trying to figure out what happened in terms of the manifestation of this and how did it come into being. And so they've used complex mathematical formulas and differentials and calculus and quantum physics to arrive at what they seem to be agreeing in terms of the origin of the universe. And what do they call that? They're all too familiar with that. They call it the Big Bang, right? But even that Big Bang goes back only 3 to 4 seconds after the Big Bang happened. So scientists are now trying to figure out what happened in those first 3 to 4 seconds. In other words, from T0 to T4, right? If you look at it in scientific terms, T0 to T4, what happened? From T4, we know, okay, so they've finally managed to converge using all of these complex, mathematical models to arrive at, okay, from T4, we know the Big Bang happened, boom, and all of this is happening. Okay, even if we admit that it's true, even if we accept that, again, that is still pretty much a speculation. The Bhagavatam is the one that gives us the picture as to what happened even before the Big Bang happened. Okay. And that's why, I titled the lecture for today, the discussion for today, as Beyond the Big Bang. What is it that we need to know? And that is the important takeaway for this session. So, as relentless the scientists are in terms of what happened after the Big Bang, or the Big Bang happened, they still are grappling with this whole paradox of what happened before those 3 to 4 seconds, because they know if they have the answer to that, then they know what triggered the Big Bang. But the problem is science, and they will only use empirical ways to figure this out. And so they're going to be caught up in this for, I don't know, God knows how long, but they're never going to be able to get out of that mindset until they change their mindset, until they start to accept that science is not only about matter, but science also is included in spirituality in terms of understanding the source, the spirit behind this entire creation. So, in this discussion, then, we are being introduced to the concept of time again. I mean, it's not the very first time, but I'm saying that as we talk about T0 to T4, the first 3 to 4 seconds, and after that, the Big Bang happens, as the scientists claim, we're talking about a sequence of events which are time bound. In other words, time seems to be the influencing factor here, right? So the scientists are not denying that. The scientists are also saying, yes, our calculations are only going back to about 4 seconds at which point the Big Bang happened, which is saying that, yes, we agree that even time came into being at some point in time. But they're missing the critical and most important point of this conclusion that matter is not only a function of time, but time is a function of the spirit, meaning something has to influence the creation of matter. That influences time. But what is influencing time to happen in the first place? And that is happening through the super soul or the spirit. It is the glance of Mahavishnu in the Pradhana which is actually agitating it and creating, getting that whole motion in, the creation in motion from which, the Big Bang, as the scientists claim, happened. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam as well, it is mentioned, Dvitine, Dvitya Abhiniveshataha. Dvitya, right? Matter is secondary manifestation. So Dvitya is secondary. Matter is the secondary manifestation from the spirit. So Kapiladev is gradually educating and enlightening his mother Devahuti as to how this material creation comes into being time after time and is also destroyed time after time. So time in this material universe has a specific beginning, a middle, and an end, right? So we are born at a specific time, and we have an end point in our life at a specific time, which we call death, right? So this in the material world is very, very, very finite. Whereas in the spiritual world, time is absolute. And that also we learn from the Bhagavatam, that time in the spiritual world is absolute. The Supreme Lord can be, enjoying his pastimes to please his devotees again in various ways, and he can be a little boy in Vrindavan. He can be this powerful king in Dwaraka. Yeah, he could be, a chariot driver for Arjuna in the Battle of Kurukshetra, right? Or he can be, taking different forms to be with his devotees anywhere in any universe, material or spiritual, right? And in that case, through the influence again of his energies, including Yogamaya, he's able to conduct these pastimes to, for the pleasure of his devotees. And he loves that loving exchange with his devotees. So that's absolute time. That's absolute time. There's no sequence. It's not like, now we have morning and after that comes, lunchtime and then there is dinner. No, that concept that happens only in the material universe. We have a very finite sequence where time is only going in a linear fashion, is going from start to end. In the spiritual world, I don't need to belabor this point, but basically in the spiritual world, it is absolute time where it is completely driven at Krishna's will. He is still the controller of what is happening in the material universe. He is still influencing time as it goes. So we're going through the different yuga cycles, through the influence, through the facilitation of his associates. We are able to, get through, see time as it's going by through all the different yugas, from Satya Yuga through Kali Yuga and everything in between. So even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, time I am. So Krishna is the supreme controller and he controls time. Time is coming from him. Moving on. Now, normally when we speak about, the eight elements we talk about, 25 is a little difficult for us to keep in our minds, our simple, frail minds. So constantly, it is simplified to, here are the eight material elements, of which five are gross elements and three are subtle elements. So the five gross elements, earth, water, air, ether, and fire. And the three subtle elements that we refer to are mind, intelligence, and false ego. Hey, wait a second. We just read that there are four subtle elements in these texts. So basically, what that is there is a distinction made between ego and consciousness. Okay, there's a distinction made between ego and consciousness. Ego, or sorry, consciousness that is contaminated, and that's why in the text it is called contaminated consciousness, is false ego. So ego is the true self. When we say ego, we're referring to ourself. We're not talking about being proud or, when we say ego in the true sense, it really, really means our knowledge about ourself, the soul, not this body. It's the contaminated consciousness, which is the false ego. And what is that? It is focusing on this material covering that we have on the soul. And this material covering is nothing but our bodily conception. Okay, I hope that is clear. False ego, when we refer to false ego, we are referring to our material concept or, material bodily concept. And that is the contaminated consciousness as it is described in these verses. So the moment we identify with this gross body of ours, thinking this body is me, we are in the state of contaminated consciousness, which is also called ahankara, right? Or ignorance. As we will see in the next few verses, Lord Kapiladev is also telling us that ahankara also causes fear, fear of death, right? That is the ultimate fear. It's the ultimate endpoint in our finite time. And so Lord Kapiladev is also giving a very clear description of, what that fear is all about, right? Because everybody in this universe, one way or the other, we're all afraid of death. Yeah, how we, deal with that is different externally and internally. Some may be very, very bold and may, be very warrior-like in terms of facing death. Some may, be, completely in paranoia, thinking every minute they're going to be dying. And some may be totally ignorant in terms of how they want to deal with death, and they're like, when it comes, it comes. But nevertheless, there is always that fear of death is always there, that at some point, death is going to happen. Just like we are born at a finite point in time, death is going to happen. So the coming into this world, everybody welcomes that. People are cooing and laughing and celebrating and all of that, the socializing, and everybody's cuddling and hugging, giving you hugs. It's full of love. But when death happens, and it's a very sad moment in life, and it's a huge loss for the people who are left behind. It's like a complete void. So that leaves a major, major impact and a major impression on the people who are left behind. And for the person who's making that transition, those moments can be terrifying, not knowing what's happening. And they don't want to leave, the people, their people behind and the things behind, all of those things, those attachments that exist within each and every one of us, family, friends, assets, wealth, name it. So there is, so Kapiladev here, going back to what Kapiladev was trying to say, is that this ahankara is the cause for that fear of death. But Krishna very clearly says also in the Bhagavad Gita and everywhere that we read in the Bhagavatam that, there is no death for the soul. The soul itself cannot die. It's the material body that has a beginning and end. The soul itself is Sat Chit Ananda. Sat Chit Ananda. So, however, due to the misidentification, or better said, our over absorption in this bodily concept of life, that becomes the root cause for our fear for death. Now, we say the child is growing, right? We say when we look at a little one, we say, hey, you've grown over. I saw you last month or last year, and you were only this much. Or, we reflect in life and we're looking at, our grandkids, our children, and we're saying, oh, not so long ago, you were just a little baby, you were running around in your diapers, and now look, you've become a grown up. But what is actually happening is that the cells in the child's body are changing. And change is again a function of time, right? So it's not like, growing is used in a very colloquial way, but actually what we're referring to is the change in the state of the body. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yata dehe, in that verse, very clearly the description is given how this change progresses from, from being a little cell, from being a birth, from birth to youth, to adulthood, to old age, and finally dwindling and leaving this body. So the body dies. So what this means is, while all of this change is happening under the influence of time, it is happening under the control of the spirit. It is another way to say this is, it's not like the cell wakes up one day and says, "Oh, today I want to be a hair follicle, or I want to be a brain cell." You know, so there is an order in the universe that is programmed by, I would say, the ultimate programmer, that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the ultimate programmer. He is in total control. He's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient in terms of what is happening in this entire creation, not just in our material universe, but this entire creation with all the living entities in this universe. So in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 3, Krishna says, Indriyani paranyahur. Indriyani paranyahur. So he says the working, in that verse, he's talking about how the working senses are superior to the dull matter, and superior to the senses is the mind. He says, Indriyebhya param manaha. And even more superior to the mind is intelligence. Manastu parabuddhir. Manastu parabuddhir. Says even superior to the mind is the intelligence. And even more superior to the intelligence is ultimately the soul. So the soul is on the spiritual platform. So science, as we know it, what we've been taught in our schools as we grew up, is that it does not tell us anything about the soul being, right on top of the food chain there, or in this case, being the superior element in this whole hierarchy, right? It just stops at the level of matter, right? Matter in terms of an atom of iron or an atom of sulfur, and how these mixtures and compounds are made. But it's again, nothing about the whole source of how life happens, right? So a carbon atom is just a carbon atom in science, right? There's no intelligence there. There's no life in the atom of carbon, for instance. But at the same time, if you look at it, every human being, and everything that is organic in this universe is made of carbon atoms, right? I mean, there's no organic chemistry without carbon. But yet, none of the scientists are able to explain, okay, so how does this carbon atom actually have life? How does it create life? How do these carbon atoms come together in the way that they come together and form life? They're not able to come up with any kind of possible explanation other than saying, oh, this is all evolution, this all happened by chance, right? So that's the sad part about science. It doesn't give us a clear picture. It only helps us to deal because human beings in general hate uncertainty. We can only deal with certainty, and that too to a certain point. So therefore, science also tries to explain and create that certainty so that we're not in constant anxiety. But then there are other anxieties due to the modes of material nature, as we're reading in these texts in this chapter, that are constantly impelling us to make things happen, and we do things in a way that we end up with karmic reactions, and the anxieties only grow. But the fundamentals in terms of how life is happening, how creation happens, how there is the spirit soul that is the highest authority when it comes to creation, is something that is completely amiss in any scientific publication, book, knowledge that we have even today. So even Google Acharya is not able to explain that. Okay. So we are seeing that Lord Kapila is very systematically he's enlightening Mother Devahuti with from her initial questioning. And what is her questioning is all about? Her questioning is all about, I'm so very sick with all of these disturbances that are caused by the mind, by these material senses. And because of this sense disturbance, I've fallen into an abyss of ignorance. And that's a dangerous and dark place, which most of us are, right? We're all trying to fight with this. We all think that, yeah, we can get over it. We tend to get over it, at least we think we are for a moment. And then the modes act on us. And again, we're slipping down that slippery slope. And before you know it, we're down at the bottom of this abyss. And then everything is dark around us. Everything is dark around us. And that darkness of ignorance is what we're all fighting through day after day, moment after moment. And that's why we need the spiritual guidance. And Krishna is so kind that he sends us the spiritual master. And through Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, we're able to bring ourselves to a point where we can actually receive that mercy that is coming from the Supreme Lord through his instruments. And that's what Lord Kapila Dev is trying to tell his mother, Devahuti. Don't be in any anxiety. It is, there is a formula for this. And that formula is, that secret sauce is that you need to engage in devotional service. So he's very, very clear and he's simplifying it for us because otherwise we're just going to be caught up in all of these various theories that are floating around us. We don't know which is which. How do we authenticate? And like I said, it is only through sadhu, shastra, right? And we are able to actually, through Guru Sadhu Shastra, is where we're able to actually distinguish the falsities and the theories and the speculation from the absolute truth. And that is why it is so important for us to continue to stay engaged and through proper hearing and continuous hearing, this knowledge is only going to become clearer and clearer and clearer. It's not like that we read it once and we get it all. Obviously, our material faculties or these mental faculties of ours are only limited, very finite. And so they need, especially in Kali Yuga, we need constant reiteration in terms of, reading this knowledge and revisiting this knowledge again and again to be able to fully understand, what is being said and what the true intent is of this knowledge, right? Ata Brahma Jigyasa. So we need to really be inquiring, that genuine desire has to be there in us to be able to, question what is the purpose in life? Why are we here? What are we trying to do? What are we doing? Wow, what makes us so different than, animals and other living entities, right? The issue is the material energy is so strong that the modes of material nature constantly pounding us, from all sides, 360. In fact, it is said that every 1/20th of a second, Maya is acting on us, pulling us in different directions. So if we lose control for even 1/20th of a second, which again, it may be even smaller in terms of nanoseconds and so on, we can very easily, and that's what happens. We get agitated, we get pulled away to a point that, the thinking doesn't become, it becomes less clear and becomes confused and it's full of anxieties. So we're not able to use our senses properly. So when we don't use the senses properly, obviously, then we are losing control and we are engaging more and more in sense gratification, right? Because we think this is what is going to give us happiness. So that's going to give us happiness. But we know happiness in this material world is very temporary. Instead, it is dukkhalayam ashashvatam, right? It's very temporary and it is full of miseries. But the in one sense, the mind is so hell bent on creating that sense of happiness for each of us that we're constantly looking for happiness. We're exploring this, exploring that. We're trying this, we're trying that. We think we're getting happiness. We think we're perceiving some happiness, but that is very, very temporary and it just falls away. Very soon, we're back to square number one, right? In fact, Prabhupada will give this example where, we're constantly hitting our heads against the wall. I mean, we're getting a headache. The brain is in total dysfunction, and we have a severe, severe headache. We continue to hit our heads against the wall, hit against the wall. And every now and then, we get some spiritual guidance and we get our heads away from the wall and we say, that's so beautiful. That's so nice. And then again, the material modes act on us and we're boom, boom, boom. We're going back to hitting our heads on the wall. So we've heard that all too often, but somehow the change doesn't happen easily. That transformation doesn't happen easily. And that's why here Kapil Dev is giving us a very clear instruction, a very simplified instruction, saying, Buddhu, listen to me, hear me out. This is what you need to do. Just simply engage in devotional service. By engaging in devotional service, you're getting away from indulging in sense gratification. So thereby reducing this headache, reducing this whole propensity to keep hitting our heads on the wall again and again and again. We're bleeding, but we still want to do that, right? So he's unequivocally saying, please engage in devotional service. That way you can get freed from sense gratification and you can really achieve real happiness that is eternal. So that's what he's telling Mother Devahuti as well. Mother Devahuti is in anxiety. She's now by herself. Her husband has fulfilled his responsibilities and he's moved on, Kardama Muni. So now she's like, what happens to me? What do I do with this life? I've been so engaged in other, sensual activities for this long, and now I feel like I'm in the darkness of ignorance. Please help me out. I feel so disturbed. I am not at peace with myself. So that is actually the genesis for what Kapila Dev is instructing, as was, already predicted early on Even Lord Brahma had instructed Kardama Muni, and Kardama Muni told his wife as well that, look, the Lord is going to be coming as your son. He's going to incarnate as your son, and he is going to be giving you instructions in terms of how you can free yourself from this cycle of life and death, birth, cycle of birth and death. And that applies to all of us. So getting to the end of this discussion here, there are some key takeaways that I'd like for us to focus on, which is first of all looking at it even from a perspective of okay, what are the aggregate elements that we're talking about here. So there are not just 24, but there are 25 elements that include time. And as Lord Kapiladev is very clearly telling us, beyond those 25 elements that includes time, there is the spirit soul. That is very, very, very key for us to understand. So, importantly, we can leverage time to either focus on these 24 material elements, right? Which means engaging in sense gratification, or very simply put, we could focus on the spirit soul, which means engaging in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So engaging in sense gratification will only, as we know, bind us. It's a karma bandhana, right? You're constantly, or gunas, as we talk about, these sagunas are only going to be binding us to this material world, right? Guna, by definition, even in the Bhagavad Gita, is ropes, defined as ropes or bondage. So we're just completely tied. The more and more we get involved or indulge in sense gratification, all we're doing is we're just tying ourselves to this material world. And what happens is this happens lifetime after lifetime, lifetime after lifetime. So time is doing its thing, creating, maintaining, and destroying. So time plays, especially in this material world, right? We're talking about in this material context, time is doing its thing. We are getting completely caught up. So we need to be, Kapila Dev is giving us the intelligence to say, hey, the same time factor, which can really bind you to this material world, can be the same time factor that can relieve you from all of this and move you towards real happiness. See the beauty through the influence of time. You have a choice. We all have a choice to be able to either engage in sense gratification and stay in the material world forever, or we can use the time factor to engage in devotional service and completely break the cycle of birth and death. So, by doing that, we can regain our constitutional position, the Swarupa, right? So, the choice is ours. Now, today is Easter, and Easter, as you know, is a very auspicious day and is being celebrated through the world by many, many, many millions of people and Christians. And basically, the essence of Easter is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So there's an anecdote I'd like to share with you. There was once a very, very rich merchant who approached Jesus Christ and said, Christ, actually, he said, Jesus, can you please tell me what would make me happy in life? I mean, this was a very rich merchant. He had, in today's money, perhaps, if not billions, millions of dollars. And he walks up to Jesus, and Jesus is sitting there with all of his disciples. And as they're having a discussion, he enters, that discussion, and he says, Jesus, can you please tell me what can make me happy? So Jesus looks at him and says, just give away all your belongings, all your assets, your properties, all your money, and simply come to me. What do you think happened? The reaction was this terribly rich merchant who had this very valid question, which, all of us should be having, what is true happiness? He just turned around and walked away in disappointment. So one may ask, oh my gosh, why would you expect, this merchant to react this way? I mean, was he disappointed in Jesus? Was he disappointed in the response that Jesus gave? All of these questions may come to your mind, but actually, the disappointment was in himself. The merchant felt so disappointed in himself that, hmm, I'm not able to give away. I'm not able to, detach myself from my attachments that I have. So it's not that he's doubting what Jesus said, but instead he was reflecting on himself, saying, "Look at me. I'm so disappointed in me that I'm not able to give up my attachments, these material attachments, to go be with Jesus and Lee, and who's leading me to a higher path, to a higher destination." So that is what Krishna is saying. Krishna is saying, stop indulging in these material senses and material sense objects, but instead use the influence of time to your best benefit, which is engaging in devotional service. Now, Srila Prabhupada reminds us several times, this is the last point that I wanted to make, is he reminds us that Srila Prabhupada says, the Supreme Lord gives us, I mean, truly loves us. I mean, he says he truly, truly, truly loves us. And he loves us to a point that we can never love the Supreme Lord more than he loves us, right? He loves us so much. He loves us so much that he loves us more than we can ever love him, not only in this lifetime, or maybe millions of lifetimes. And when you love someone, you do not force anything upon them. So there's a saying, when you love something or when you love someone, you let it free or you set it free. If it comes back, it's yours. And if it doesn't, then it was never meant to be, right? So the Lord loves us so much that he gives us the free will. And we discuss this topic quite often, the power of free will. It it is up to us to decide what we want to do with this precious free will. That is a gift that Krishna is giving us because he loves us so much. So we need to sincerely introspect and ask ourselves this most important question. Do we hold on to our baggage and these false shelters, or do we lovingly engage in devotional service and then return back home, back home to Godhead? So that is the question we need to ask ourselves. So yes, Kapila Dev in these verses is talking about the material elements. It is not a class that, on a science class that he's trying to give his Mother Devahuti, but instead he's driving home the intent and the purpose and the um, true meaning of what it's leading to, which is the source behind all of this is what we need to grasp. And the source being the Supreme Personality. That is the Supreme Spirit. That's what we need to aspire for. That's what we need to understand where all of these material elements are coming from. Yeah, it's okay to know and good to know about, what these material elements are, but more importantly, it is what do these material elements mean in the context of the spirit soul, which is the highest authority in all creation. So by engaging ourselves and engaging our time in a way that we can engage with the Supreme Lord through devotional service is what Kapila Dev is saying is the simple way to get out of this cycle of birth and death. So with that, I'll stop the discussion here. I mean, from my end, I know I've been babbling quite a bit. If there's any questions, any discussion, any comments, I'd like to hear any thoughts that you'd like to share. Please do. If not, wishing you all a fun-filled Krishna conscious week. Stay vigilant, engage in devotional service, be in the association of devotees, and chant Hare Krishna. Remember Krishna always. Hare Krishna.